Cold open. Imagine two people, same city, same year, same amount of money sitting in their bank accounts. Let's say $50,000 each. One of them buys real estate. The other buys a mutual fund. 5 years later, the first person is worth $400,000. The second person? About $62,000. Same starting point, same time period, completely different outcomes. Now here's the question nobody asks. Was the first person smarter? Did they work harder? Did they make better decisions? No. They just found out first. There is a system, invisible, legal, deeply embedded in how modern economies function, that delivers new money, new assets, and new opportunities to a very specific group of people before anyone else ever gets a chance. And by the time the rest of the world finds out something is valuable, that group has already bought it, held it, and sometimes already sold it at a profit. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's not shadowy billionaires in back rooms. It's not even particularly secret. It's just a mechanism most people never bother to understand, because understanding it requires sitting with a deeply uncomfortable truth about how wealth actually moves in this world. So let's talk about it. Why this matters right now. For most of human history, wealth creation was relatively straightforward, even if brutally unfair. You owned land. You extracted resources. You controlled trade routes. The advantages were obvious.
You could see them, touch them, sometimes fight over them. But somewhere in the 20th century, something changed. The most important forms of wealth became abstract. Credit, equity, derivatives, digital assets, monetary policy. Things you cannot hold in your hand, but which determine, more than almost anything else, what your life looks like 20 years from now. And here's what's interesting. As wealth became more abstract, the mechanism for distributing it became more concentrated. Not because of some grand design, but because abstract wealth requires information to navigate. And information, in any system, always flows unevenly. The people at the center of the flow get it first. The people at the edges get it last. And in financial systems, the difference between first and last is not a matter of months. Sometimes it's a matter of days. Sometimes hours. And in those hours, fortunes are made. We're living through a period right now where this mechanism is operating at speeds and scales that have never existed before. Interest rates, monetary policy, asset valuations, currency flows, all of it moving faster, touching more people's lives, more invisibly than at any point in history. If you don't understand how this system works, you're not just leaving money on the
table. You're actively funding the returns of people who do understand it. The system, step by step. Let's start at the very beginning, and I mean the very beginning, at the moment new money is created. Most people believe money works like this. The government prints it. The government spends it. It flows through the economy. Everyone gets a roughly equal shot at it. Like water filling a bathtub. It rises together. That is not how it works. Modern economies create money primarily through two channels. The first is government spending, fiscal policy. The second, and far more important one for our purposes, is central bank intervention, monetary policy. And within monetary policy, the most powerful tool is something called open market operations. Here's what that actually means. When a central bank, like the US Federal Reserve, decides to inject money into the economy, it doesn't print cash and mail it to citizens. It buys financial assets. Specifically, it buys government bonds and sometimes mortgage-backed securities from large commercial banks and financial institutions. It purchases these assets and pays for them by crediting those institutions' accounts at the central bank, essentially creating new money out of nothing, depositing it directly into the accounts of the largest financial players in the world. This is not a secret. This is published policy. The Fed releases minutes of every meeting. Economists write about it constantly. But here's
what rarely gets said out loud. At the moment that money is created, it is not yours. It is not in the economy in any meaningful sense for ordinary people. It sits inside the banking system. And before it diffuses outward through lending, spending, and circulation, which takes months, sometimes years, the people who hold it first have an extraordinary advantage. They can buy assets before prices rise. The Cantillon effect. There is a name for this phenomenon. It's called the Cantillon effect, named after Richard Cantillon, an Irish-French economist who wrote about it in the early 18th century. He noticed something that has proven to be one of the most durable observations in all of economics. New money does not benefit everyone equally, and the inequality is not random. It is positional. Cantillon's core insight was this: whoever receives new money first gets to spend it at current prices. By the time that money circulates further through the economy and reaches the last people in the chain, prices have already risen to reflect the new money supply. So the first recipients gain purchasing power. The last recipients effectively lose it, because now everything costs more, but their nominal income has not yet adjusted. He was writing about 18th century France, about kings and merchants and coin clippers, but the mechanism he described is not merely a historical curiosity.
It is the operating logic of every modern central bank. The first recipients in today's economy are not farmers or craftsmen, they are primary dealer banks. The roughly 24 financial institutions that are authorized to transact directly with the Federal Reserve. Institutions like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, Bank of America. When the Fed creates new money through quantitative easing, something it has done on a truly extraordinary scale since 2008, it flows first into these institutions. Those institutions can then use it to purchase assets, equities, real estate investment trusts, high-yield bonds, commodities. Asset prices rise. The shareholders of those institutions, and anyone else who already holds assets, becomes wealthier. And the ordinary person, who holds no financial assets, whose wealth is primarily in their labor and their savings account, watches the cost of housing go up, watches the stock market hit record highs, and feels correctly that something is deeply wrong, without being able to name exactly what it is. The math no one talks about. Let's make this concrete. Between 2008 and 2022, the Federal Reserve's balance sheet expanded from roughly $900 billion to nearly $9 trillion. That is the amount of assets the Fed purchased, the amount of new money it injected into the financial system. During that same period, the S&P 500 went from around 800 points to over 4,500. Real estate prices in major U.S. cities roughly doubled or tripled. The net worth of
American billionaires increased by somewhere between $1 and $1.3 trillion between March and September of 2020 alone, the first 6 months of pandemic-era money creation. Meanwhile, median real wages, wages adjusted for inflation, grew by roughly 8% over that entire 14-year period. 8%. The people who owned financial assets watched their wealth multiply. The people who owned primarily their labor watched their purchasing power grow by less than 1% per year. Now here's where it gets really interesting. When inflation finally showed up in 2021 and 2022, the Fed raised interest rates aggressively to fight it. And what happened? Asset prices fell. The stock market dropped roughly 20%. Real estate began to cool. But here's who actually got hurt. The large financial institutions? They had largely already rotated out of the most rate-sensitive positions. They had had months of warning, through Fed communications, through the dot plot, through the minutes that Wall Street analysts parse within seconds of release.
The retail investor. The person who finally started investing in 2020 and 2021 because they read that everyone was getting rich and they didn't want to miss out. They were the last to buy. And when the reversal came, they were the last to sell. Last in, first to lose. This is not an accident. This is the architecture of the system. Information as the invisible currency. Now, if the Cantillon effect was the only mechanism at play, you might think the solution is simple. Just buy assets early. Just own stocks and real estate and you'll be fine. But there's a second layer to this system, and it's arguably more important. Information asymmetry. Let's be precise about what this means. It doesn't just mean that some people know more than others. Of course they do. It means that in financial systems, information is itself a commodity. It has value. It is bought, sold, guarded, and leaked strategically. And the people who are structurally closest to where decisions are made, whether monetary policy decisions, regulatory decisions, or corporate decisions, receive that information before markets can price it in. This is why insider trading laws exist. And this is also why, despite those laws, the academic evidence consistently shows that certain categories of people, corporate insiders, members of Congress, family members of central bank officials,
Aggregate zero-sum
outperform the
nature of
market
trading?
statistically
What would it
significantly.
change about how you think?
A 2004
Not
study
just
by
about your
Alan
personal
Ross-
finances, about legitimacy, about the narratives we tell ourselves about why some people are rich and others are not, about whether wealth and value creation are always the same thing, about what we consider fair and what we've simply normalized because it's always been this way. The invisible system keeps running. The question isn't just whether you can find your way closer to the front of the line. The question is whether the line itself makes any sense.